Let's dive right into this explainer and explore exactly how dictators consolidate absolute power. We so often focus on the terrifying, brutal tools of authoritarianism. But today, we're going to crack open a totally different playbook. We're going to look at how Mussolini's fascist Italy built its dominance not just through sheer fear, but by sliding right into the utterly mundane, everyday parts of life. And the crazy thing? The tactics they used look surprisingly like modern corporate perks and, well, extreme home makeovers.
So ask yourself, how do dictators actually build genuine loyalty? The midnight arrests, the secret police, the total censorship. These are the dark hallmarks we usually picture, right? But here's the thing. Relying solely on terror is exhausting. It's incredibly expensive, and ultimately it's just unsustainable for a regime. To truly capture a nation and maintain that long-term stability, a dictator has to manufacture real, breathing loyalty. The population actually needs to feel like the government is tangibly improving their daily lives. It turns out the secret ingredient to absolute control isn't always a weapon. Sometimes it's just organizing everyone's weekend plans.
It is a classic, stark contrast. You've got the police state and strict censorship on one hand, which were absolutely real and devastating components of fascist Italy. But Mussolini realized pretty early on that a stick without a carrot, that just breeds resentment and eventually rebellion. He knew he needed to offer something that looked like genuine generosity. We're talking cheap holidays, local sports clubs, entertainment. By handing out these benefits, the regime brilliantly masked its iron grip behind the smiling, friendly face of state-sponsored leisure.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, dictatorships beyond just fear. Second, dopo lavoro, the loyalty program. Third, marshes, the extreme makeover. And finally, cementing absolute fascist power. Okay, jumping into part one, dictatorships beyond just fear, looking past the secret police.
Moving to part two, dopo lavoro, the loyalty program. Think of this as the ultimate 1920s corporate perks package.
Imagine a massive, state-run loyalty program, perfectly designed to buy the affection of the working class. Founded in 1925, the Opera Nazionale dopo lavoro literally translates to after work. Before this came along, the leisure time of Italian workers was mostly organized by socialist cooperatives or the Catholic Church. But the fascist state, they aggressively swooped in and took over the space entirely. Suddenly, the government was basically walking right through the front doors of poorer rural and industrial communities, handing them unprecedented, shiny new ways to relax and socialize. And the scale of this was just mind-blowing. By 1939, a staggering 4 million Italians were dues-paying members. 4 million. This wasn't just some popular local club. It became one of the absolute largest mass organizations in fascist Italy, with over 20,000 local branches scattered across the country. By capturing this massive membership base, the state successfully bypassed the usual avenues of control, like the factory floor or the classroom. Instead, they managed to completely monopolize the most private, unguarded hours of millions of citizens' lives. Literally, when people were off the clock, they were on the state's time. The sheer variety of these perks was incredible, covering thousands of facilities. We're talking heavily discounted train tickets for weekend getaways to the beach or the mountains, organized football leagues, cycling clubs, and thousands of subsidized trips to the theater and cinema. They set up community radio listening groups, marching bands, local dances, you name it. By building all this infrastructure for fun, Mussolini masterfully engineered this image of himself as a deeply invested, paternal leader. For an ordinary worker in the 1920s and 30s who had barely ever traveled past their own village, this felt like an absolute life-changing upgrade to their standard of living. But of course, nothing is ever truly free, right? This was a highly calculated exchange. Those charming seaside trips and community dances were paid for with absolute obedience. Leisure was the ultimate Trojan horse. The deeper political aim here was to literally wire the Italian brain to associate enjoyment, community, and national pride entirely with fascism. So while workers were just hanging out, playing bocce, or watching a play, they were completely surrounded by fascist imagery. The activities themselves subtly but firmly spread the regime's core values: rigorous discipline, national unity, physical fitness for future wars, and above all else, unwavering loyalty to Il Duce.
Let's pivot to part three, marshes, the extreme makeover. This is the ultimate 1930s infrastructure PR stunt.
So shifting from the soul of the people to the soil beneath their feet, let's look at the biggest extreme landscape makeover in Italian history. To really get why this was such a monumental PR victory, you have to look at the historical before picture.
The Pontine Marshes, located just southeast of Rome, were notoriously stagnant, dangerous, and swarming with malaria-carrying mosquitoes. For literally over 2,000 years, everyone, from Roman emperors to Renaissance popes, and even the recent Italian liberal governments, had tried and completely, utterly failed to drain this massive swamp. It was a glaring, physical monument to political and engineering failure. Now notice the brilliant branding here. Mussolini didn't just frame the digging of canals and the building of water pumps as a standard public works project. Oh no, he branded it as an epic, heroic battle for land. Launched aggressively in 1928, the practical goals were clear: eradicate malaria, drain the swamp, and massively boost domestic farming so Italy could be self-sufficient. But the underlying message? That was purely symbolic. It was about proving to the whole world, and especially to Italians, that fascism could physically conquer and remake the treacherous landscape where centuries of previous rulers and democracies had totally failed. The regime managed to reclaim a staggering 80,000 hectares of land across Italy through this program. That is a massive chunk of real estate, with the Pontine Marshes acting as the absolute crown jewel of the entire effort. They sent tens of thousands of workers into the region to dig these huge canals and wipe out the mosquitoes. But here is the true, insidious genius of the power grab. To populate these shiny, perfectly gridded new farms, the government carefully handpicked impoverished peasant families, mostly from northern regions. By uprooting these settlers and handing them brand new homes, land, and farming equipment, Mussolini instantly created a deeply indebted demographic. Their very existence and prosperity relied 100% on the fascist state, and that bred an absolute, unbreakable loyalty. This epic battle against nature meant that entirely new, incredibly orderly showcase towns started popping up right out of the mud. Just look at this rapid-fire chronological expansion. The regime inaugurated Littoria in 1932, then boom, Sabaudia in 1934, Pontinia in 1935, Aprilia in 1937, and finally Pomezia in 1939. And these weren't just functional little farming villages. They were grand, imposing monuments of fascist urban planning, built in this stark, modern, rationalist architectural style that was explicitly designed to project an aura of total, disciplined control. And unlike complicated, invisible economic policies, this extreme makeover gave fascism a highly visible, instantly understandable success story. I mean, you can't easily photograph agricultural tariffs, right? But you can definitely film a deadly swamp being transformed into a gleaming white city. The state propaganda machine just went into massive overdrive. Mussolini was constantly filmed visiting the newly reclaimed land. He'd often appear shirtless amongst the workers, harvesting grain, or standing heroically next to these modern tractors. It completely cemented his image as a dynamic, modern action man who is literally bending nature to his will. Bringing us to our final section, Part 4, Cementing Absolute Fascist Power, Masking Control with Community and Construction.
So tying this whole explainer together, we can really see how these two seemingly friendly, helpful strategies were actually brilliant, insidious mechanisms of authoritarian control. Think about these two tactics side by side. First, you have the Dopo Lavoro acting exactly like a modern corporate perks program, capturing the heart and everyday social life, which results in deep community loyalty and quiet obedience. And second, you have the reclamation of the Pontine Marshes serving as the ultimate extreme makeover PR stunt, capturing the physical landscape, resulting in explosive national pride, and solidifying the dictator's image as infallible.
Together, these dual strategies allowed Mussolini to boldly claim that fascism was way more than just a political party. It positioned itself as this all-encompassing, transformative lifestyle. Centuries of historical failure in the marshes were literally flipped into a massive point of intense national pride. A disease-ridden wasteland became perfectly planned architectural marvels. By dramatically improving daily life with subsidized sports clubs, free holidays, and pristine new farms, the regime wove itself inextricably into the very fabric of Italian life. The people weren't just ruled by fascism from some distant capital. They lived in its houses, they played on its football pitches, and they farmed on its land.
So I want to leave you with this incredibly provocative thought to chew on. If a dictator back in the 1930s could effectively buy mass loyalty with heavily subsidized football clubs, cinema tickets, and flashy new infrastructure projects, where else do we see this invisible trade-off happening right now? How often do modern political systems, or even massive modern corporations, use the allure of leisure, daily convenience, and glossy infrastructure to quietly manufacture our loyalty and obedience today? It's a fascinating and honestly a slightly unsettling lens through which to view our own modern daily perks.